Before we get started, make sure you subscribe to this channel and click the alert notification.
Hello and welcome to lecture number 6 in Building Competitive Intelligence series. And this particular lecture is quite exciting for me because I deal with this a lot of the time. This is kind of like been my work over the last 10 years in particular, looking at how we address the perennial problems, how we address parasitic processing, unapprehendable margin, and arrhythmic rhythm in a tennis match. Here I want to take a closer look at the real kind of states that players get themselves into, and the way that they present themselves when they're competing, particularly when they've lost the match. See, well, I know that you wouldn't experience something like parasitic processing as parasitic processing. Okay, we'll be experiencing that in different ways. So I want to have a look at some of these symptoms. What are they? So I'm going to have justice mode, downward spiral, checking out. We'll throw in a couple more. Lost. I'm going to use this term. It might seem a little dramatic. Cognitive suicide. So from the bottom, so ill-prepared is players often say, well, I've not been playing the right players, okay, or I've not been training enough, I'm not doing the right things in training, and so on, or I need to correct it and I haven't done it. Lostness, cognitive suicide. When we look at combinatorial explosion, we're going to be looking at it in a bit more detail, but the sense of, well, I just don't know what to do. I've tried everything. When I'm in a match, I don't know. Checking out it's not my day today. The anxiety reaches a certain point and we say, oh well, it's not my fault. It's not my day. Deceptively positive, actually, when the player comes off and they're checked out. They're quite upbeat. Downward spiral, they're not. They're like, oh my God, for whatever reason. And there's a lot of things that can go down with the downward spiral. Justice mode. Well, it's unfair. When a player is in justice mode, it's quite black and white, they're not winning, it's unfair because they're not winning, it might be that they're being cheated, or when people are in justice mode, it can be very destructive because what they're doing is, look, I've been training, I'm better than my opponent, and this shouldn't be happening, this should be happening, and it isn't. Not a great position to be in. Now, if you remember, when we looked at parasitic processing, and I'm going to draw this back up again because it is important, we had what was called the availability bias, or the availability heuristic. So that was the one where a heuristic is a problem-solving mechanism, a shortcut, a widget, if you like, that we use all the time. We need them, we need to be able to make insightful decisions quickly. That's where heuristic comes in. The downside is that when something bad is happening, the availability heuristic can cause a few problems, and it's the heuristic is the one where, because the thought is available, so the thought about a particular outcome is available and easily imaginable. Because it is easily imaginable and I can draw on experiences quickly, that means it raises the probability of this thing happening. So if you remember when Grandma says, you need to make sure that back door is locked, because I can easily imagine someone coming in and taking your phone and your money and so on, because she can easily imagine it, it's more probable. No, No, it's not. So that's the problem with the availability heuristic. Here we go. So we interpret an event as bad. And it's bad, and what we do is we get the representative heuristic and the availability heuristic. Representative is Moneyball. So yeah, when they go, oh, we need that baseball player. They look the part. They hit good stuff. Everyone else wants them. Yeah, so therefore they represent the best that we can get. They represent the best. Therefore they will be the best. And if you remember, is it Benjamin Bean? Yeah, the Brad Pitt character was like saying, no, that's not right. Just because they look great or they should be great and everyone else thinks they're great. I've got the data here showing that these guys are much better value for money. They get results. And what we do, the availability heuristic works with encoded memory. Okay? So the same way we can't remember being sad. We can't remember being happy when we're in a mood or the state of sadness. We remember sad events only. Very hard to remember happy events. We've got encoded memory. Our memory is encoded by context. And these heuristics, they're picking out from the encoded memory bad events. That's what's happening. Representative bad events. He's really good. He's better than me, based on my belief there that he is. Therefore, he is. And the availability heuristic, where I can easily imagine that. I can easily imagine bad events. These two working together, and they together produce confirmation bias, being very popular recently. This term. So we're finding things based on principle number 10 as well on previous belief. We're confirming that this is a bad event. The probability is great, leading to anxiety, less cognitive ability. Solve problems. So I always run out of space when I'm doing a good old parasitic processing map. Make mistakes. That's going to contribute to my anxiety and increase the idea of probability. Also contributes when I make mistakes. Look, it's happened again. Confirmation bias, making mistakes, raises our perception of the probability being great or being higher. So if we're in justice mode, it's unfair. We're in checkout mode, it's not my day. And if we're in justice mode, if we're in downward spiral, I'm doomed. Goes into my encoded memory. Down here, less flexibility. Okay, so less cognitive ability, we're less flexible, and it all starts to tighten up. Okay, so I know I've done this one before, but I want to look at it in terms of the symptoms. So when we're checking out, I use this one, checking out as the most problematic perennial problem that we face. So there's a perennial problem within parasitic processing. It's not my day, and what tends to happen, if we take it from here, representatives of this. So let's say our opponent's starting, they've hit a couple of wins, we immediately interpret that as bad. Then we can remember times where we've misjudged the situation. And actually we're a little bit unprepared for this match, so we go back to encoded memory, and we instantly select, oh god, yeah, I've misjudged, he's better than I thought he was, I'm not quite ready to play them yet. The anxiety, and then so all this happens very, very quickly. Availability, can be, I can imagine this now, me losing this. And because I can imagine it, it raises the probability. We're in confirmation bias then, and our brain then tends to settle on this idea, I'm not going to win today. But it actually, the progress is great, and we've got anxiety. And what checking out does is it removes the anxiety from a player, because they then cease to take responsibility for winning. They're not staying there being patient and sitting with this, the uncomfortable aspect or the stressful aspect of it. They want to get rid of that. And they then start to imagine scenarios where my coach isn't going to be that upset. The score's 6-2, that's not the end of the world there. If I can get a couple more games next set, no one's really going to be particularly upset. I've done my best. And then these two start to kick in again, taking from encoded memory. I remember my coach not being upset about that. He said this, and we're all looping around and trying to really get rid of that anxiety by absolving ourselves of responsibility. We do become less flexible because we kind of give up on trying to problem solve. You'll see the player will go into like ISM mode, individual shot making, when they're in this state. They seem quite happy. However, when they're in ISM mode, they'll see that they make mistakes. Oh, well, that's not my fault, that's because I'm under-rehearsed. And next time, and this is a big excuse they use a lot of the time, right, I'm going to work really hard next time. I can see on the court, I'm going to really get into that problem. I can't do it in this match, it's too late. And that's how that works. If we take justice mode, so it's not fair, I'm playing really badly. I shouldn't be playing badly. My parents have put a lot of I know my parents have put a lot of time into this. All my opponents cheating, they're taking it away again. We can see that the representative heuristic will immediately find other instances. You see a lot of this. Tall players, but below that level as well, where the matches aren't umpired. They still go to justice mode even with an umpire, but that doesn't the umpire doesn't alleviate that problem. But what they'll do is they'll very quickly form this narrative, and that's a big problem with parasitic processing. The narrative starts to form. They'll start thinking, oh, here we go again, I'm being cheated out of another match. A very common narrative with players. And we can see how that would work, how my opponent can represent a cheat, and that's the reason I'm losing. It's very easy to take from encoded memory examples of that happening in the past. Then we'll see a lot of that. So there's an unfairness, there's an injustice there, and then there might be an injustice. I'm playing at the wrong time. My coach might have been telling me the wrong thing. Lots of excuses here, and anxiety racks up. Because what we get into a really bad. I mean, anxiety is a mood in that sense, rather than emotion. But we get into that mode, that zone of unfairness, and that raises anxiety levels because I can get really angry in justice mode, and that in turn contributes to the problem. It won't go away. But justice mode, they're already preparing their day in court, on the court, if you like. So when I finish this match, we're going to get them. I'm going to do that. I'm going to complain to the umpire. Mistakes come because the corollary of justice mode is going ISM, losing any confidence in the shots, losing any flow. So, two examples there of what can happen with these symptoms. And so the narrative will develop, but the problem with narratives is, don't forget this happens really quickly, the narrative will then start to kick in. We get what we call a general narrative. And the point I would make about narratives is they're not reality. We're kind of moving towards a narrative-less play, if you like. When we're on the court, we don't want this. We don't want the narrative developing. They're very restrictive. Narrative kills flexibility, by the way. Okay, so what are the problems with symptoms? So the symptoms can become like an illness. They can move from being acute in a match to being chronic ones. They become a narrative, and that's what a narrative is. it acts like an illness. Look, I'm not saying all narratives are bad, and we need some kind of narrative, I think, to weave things together and give us meaning. But they can become very parasitic and operate out of control. As we can see here, we can look at this not just on an instant cognitive level and process. We can look at that on a narrative process as well. I mean, you know, forming over maybe a series of matches. All of it tends to lead to less flexibility, and that's the chronic problem. Getting players to think outside their narrative is like taking away an alibi. Okay, a narrative will act as an alibi. The reason it's not my fault. Something we look at in a lot of detail in the forthcoming negotiating pressure course. Narratives will put a lot of pressure on us, but they're a kind of way we use to try and negotiate pressure. But they end up being parasitic. Technique tourism is another example of this, where players are kind of, you know, it's my backhand that's the problem, and I've hit a bad backhand, and then you jump into representative and availability of your excellence. You remember bad backhands, believe me. Confirmation bias is, well, every backhand might have been bad. The probability of me hitting a bad backhand, you can see where it goes, leads to anxiety about the backhand. We cannot then think outside of the backhand being the problem. So by technique tourism, we players and then we see this quite a lot, is they'll go to different coaches to see if they can sort out this backhand. That this particular player has convinced themselves is the problem. They go, oh, that coach, yeah, he gave me that tip. They go around. But the reason they keep going around is because, of course, that's not the problem. So if we've got a technique mindset, cast your mind back to episode 2, or lecture 2, what we will often carry that throughout our playing career. We'll carry these narratives around, we'll carry this around with us. It's like we should sling it on our back and march around taking it. It's like it's taking our alibi around with us. You try and take an alibi off someone and tell them that's not the reason they might be responsible in a different way, and see what happens. So tread carefully when questioning alibis, even though we know that they are often alibis. A quick word about contributive versus definitive. So again, with the bad backhand contributes maybe to error, but it's not definitive. I don't treat a backhand technique may contribute to the loss of some points, but it's not the definitive problem. But correcting the bad backhand can become the focus. It's treated as the definitive problem of a player. When they're in that mindset, it's hard to you've got to kind of circumnavigate these problems, because when they become narratives and alibis, they're chronic. You need a lot of skill to help the players, and players need to have a lot of skills. They need this is where the psychotechnologies are so helpful. We need to cultivate those psychotechnologies to help players address these perennial problems. Quick one, another one about, so contributive and definitive. We need to be aware of that so we can better help players. Because it is difficult to challenge their long cherished alibis that they're carrying around, these narratives. Hard thing to do. I would say though that this is a perennial problem, okay, and it's ever present. I think not to scare you off here, but you need to be aware that this. Let's say you have a good match where parasitic processing doesn't kick in, and a lot of the time our psychotechnologies intervened here before it got to that stage. You send a missile in that way, we hit it that way, because we've been working on this in practice. We've been doing the work off court as well with the cognitive processing and with our coach, and we've internalised and cultivated our different things. You know, it's not the case. You know, let's intercept confirmation bias. We're not. This doesn't happen all the time. Okay, let's say we've been working on that. We have a good match. Then often we kind of think, well, that's job done after one match. No, we need to be continually cultivating these the psychotechnologies. Psychotech. That's what competitive intelligence is doing. The job is not yet done. You know, it's often a great feeling. Come off and go, yeah, well, that's starting to work. It does work. But this is my point about negotiating pressure. And of course, it needs to be continually. There's a movement to the psychotechnologies. There's a movement to our match practice call, off-court thinking, and then back into the match again, a circularity to it that we need to cultivate and keep moving. So we need to address maybe problems of meaning again. We need to look at, you know, why we're doing this, what does this particular match mean? That's a very, very important thing to do. We need to look at our current perceptions, the narratives that may have developed, and we need to be aware of alibis. Are there, you know, it's very important work I do with players. You know, what excuses can we prepare in advance? It's always an interesting exercise. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture.